Welcome. My name is Bob Tickleman. I'm a Microsoft Principal Technical Trainer. I'm excited to be your guide for module number 2, Implement Managed Identities, part of the learning path of implementing secure cloud solutions. We're going to take a look at an identity called a managed identity, and we've seen this introduced in other recordings throughout this series. And so we're going to take a look at the two types of managed identities that we have. We're going to take a look at how to create a user-assigned and a system-assigned managed identity and their characteristics and when you might use them. We'll then take a look at configuring the managed identities and then acquiring access tokens using that identity. So when you take a look at a common challenge from a developer's perspective, the management of the secure information and the credentials that are often used becomes a bit of a challenge. And that gets amplified when we start taking a look at a solution, especially when dealing with microservices. And so I need to be able to have each part of my application have its own identity. And as maybe my application changes, I don't want to have to go back and leave these lingering artifacts so that I've got these identities that are hanging around, but no application associated with them, thereby creating a potential attack surface. Managed identities makes this much simpler to be able to do this, specifically around system-assigned managed identities. So we'll take a look at what they do for us. Now I'm going to go to the interface and show this first, and I'm going to come back and take a look at this. But the major characteristics are the system-assigned and the user-assigned, which I'll show you, and then we'll come back and take a look at the characteristics once we've seen how they're created. So let's go take a look at how this is done in the portal. So I'm currently in a web app that is part of an app service plan, and I've come down to the identity tab in the blade. You can see I have the option for a system assigned or a user assigned managed identity, and it's currently off. I'm just simply going to turn this on, and you'll see that this creates the system assigned managed identity, and they now live together. Save. There we go. So now we've got the object created. Now you can't see this because I've got a tool that masks secure information in my portal so that you don't see it as in the recording. Now what I've done is I've been able to create the system assigned managed identity. There's the service principal name, and I can now give it a role assignment. And a role, if you remember this, the RBAC permissions, I can add a role. So what is the scope? If you remember the RBAC roles, it's the who, the identity, which is what I'm dealing with. The what becomes the role, and then the scope that I want to assign it to. So I'm going to do it to maybe storage. I'm going to select a resource and come to, and the role is I want to have maybe a reader role. So these become very granular that I've now taken that role assignment. We've talked about these different roles in other recordings. I now have this identity has read permissions to the resource that I just associated it with. I could add other role assignments to other resources. So this identity associated with this application can have different permissions to different resources, and it's done at the resource level. Okay. I'm going to go in and do a demonstration then of a user assigned managed identity. I'm going to come into virtual machines. Should have a number of virtual machines here. So I'm going to take a back-end virtual machine. So under security, I'm going to get into identities here. I'm not going to use a system assigned managed identity in this case. I want to use a user assigned. You'll see that when we get back to the slides, there's a one-to-one relationship of a system assigned. The user assigned, because maybe I want this to be assigned to several devices, in this case, virtual machines. So I'm going to come into user assigned, select the subscription. I can pick an existing managed identity. I'm going to add it, so I've already got one created. And so just remember that name. It's the PZJH, so I've got that identity, and it's assigned. I'm going to say save. And I'm going to go to another object, and I'm going to be able to now assign the same identity to another object. So PZJ. So I'm going to come to the other virtual machine. and come to the front end. Identity and user assigned. Add. I can add the same identity to this object. Okay. So one of the things that we're seeing with these managed identities, and the nice thing is you didn't see me in either of those demonstrations having to create passwords for them. This is all managed in the back end by Microsoft Entra ID. So it creates that managed identity. That identity is associated with something, either in a one-to-one relationship in the case of a system assigned managed identity, or in a many-to-one. And it on a regular basis negotiates the password requirements and that security. So it's not something that we have to do. In the old days, it would be, I would create a username with a password and I have to mail both of those off to somebody. Now it's in my email and I know it. It's in your email and you know it. And if your email gets compromised, everybody who's in your compromised email knows it. These become a much more secure way to manage these identities. And so the key here is the system assigned managed identity has that one-to-one relationship, whereas user-assigned managed identity has a many-to-one, not sharing a life cycle versus sharing a life cycle, and you can see that summarized in that chart. Microsoft is constantly adding more and more Azure resources that support managed identities, and the preferred method, wherever possible, using the system-assigned managed identities. And so they're giving you some examples here, a list of an ever-growing list of source locations that can have a managed identity associated with them. And they could be then used, as you saw, to assign a role and an RBAC permission to a target resource. And so by setting that up, you've now controlled that application or that container app that you have or the container instance now has access to a storage or other resource to be able to provide that relationship of giving each component of your application its own identity. Now, this is just basically stepping you through those steps of identifying, the creation of the accounts, the assignment of the account to a resource, and how it goes through its process to get the necessary credentials and tokens needed to be able to gain access to the resource that's being identified. This is just another reiteration of the topic we've already talked about a number of times. The system assigned managed identity is the preferred method wherever possible if the resource supports it. And know that that's an ever-growing list. And so now what you have is they share that common life cycle. And this is usually related to an exam question. What is the minimum role that you need? And you'll see it listed there that you need at least the contributor role to be able to assign the identity to it. And the example they're giving you is a virtual machine. So you need to be at least a contributor to that resource to be able to assign a system assigned managed identity. We've got a whole set of SDKs that you can use to do this. Again, regardless of the development language that you want to use, whether it be Java, Node, Python, Ruby, .NET, all of them support the automation of the use of a system assigned or user assigned managed identity. The acquisition of the token is going to allow you to now have a client make that request. So it's going to have its system assigned identity, request the token it needs that can then be used in the RBAC permissions to gain access to the resource. So a quick module, let's do a knowledge check to close it out. So question number 1, a client app requests managed identities for an access token for a given resource. What is the basis of the token? So that would be the access of the managed identity, would be the access for the resource. Question number 2, which managed identity characteristic is indicative of user assigned identities? Go ahead and pause the screen. So the user assigned managed identities are separate from a life cycle of the objects that they're assigned to. It has a one-to-many relationship where that identity can be assigned to many objects. And if one of those objects gets deleted, the identity still exists. And if all of them get deleted, the identity still exists. So it has a separate management lifecycle. So bringing the module to an end, we've now seen that there's a whole new set of security principles under the service principles that are available to us using this new Microsoft Entra ID capability. The ability to have managed identities that fall in the two forms of user assigned and system assigned now provides for easy lifecycle management and a more secure application development where each component of our application can now have its own identity, and we can now have this granular control. Now you pair that on top of things like Key Vault, we now have a way for us to store secure information like those certificates. They're covered in other recordings in the series, that now we have this granular control to provide identity as the governance model for the perimeter of your security. Everything could potentially have an identity. We now can secure our applications and resources using those identities. So this brings the module to a close. So thank you for joining me in this recording, and I look forward to seeing you in another recording.